The morning light spilled through the marble windows of the Al Mahdi mansion in Houston, painting soft gold over polished floors and quiet wealth. Zara Khan moved silently through the kitchen, her hands still trembling from the cold dishwater. The sound of her own heartbeat felt louder than the ticking clock above the refrigerator. She'd been here for 4 months, long enough to memorize every creak of the floor, every routine of the family she worked for, and every rule never to be broken. The first rule, never speak unless spoken to. The second, never linger in rooms you don't belong in. Mr. Amir al-Mahdi, the patriarch, left early as always, silver cufflinks, a navy suit, and a scent that clung to the hallways long after he was gone. His wife Layla stayed upstairs most mornings, her presence like perfume, beautiful, expensive, but strangely hollow. The children, Iman, 12, and Yusuf, 8, barely looked up when Zara passed by with their breakfast tray. Zara wasn't born to serve, but poverty didn't ask for permission. She came to America chasing dignity, not pity. But in this house, dignity was something you had to hide in the folds of your apron. That morning, the wind outside was heavy with the promise of rain. Zara was rinsing fruit for lunch when she heard voices from the study next door. Low, urgent, the kind of tone people used when they didn't want to be heard. She froze, water running over her fingers. The study door was half closed. "You promised this would stay buried," said a man's voice, sharp, familiar. "I didn't have a choice," another replied. "If the board finds out about the missing funds, we're finished." "Do you understand, Amir?" "Finished?" Zara's eyes widened. She looked at the open window, the sound of the rain beginning to patter outside. Missing funds? Her first instinct was to walk away. This wasn't her world. She was just the maid. But something in the man's voice, fear, desperation, made her heart pound. The voices dropped lower, more heated. Zara moved an inch closer, pressing herself to the wall just enough to catch a few more words through the thin air between the rooms. "And what about the girl?" the other man said. "The one you hired last month, does she know anything?" A pause. Zara's breath caught. Amir's voice came again, calm but cold. "If she does, she won't for long." The room fell silent except for the steady rhythm of rain. Zara stepped back, her mind spinning. The fruit rolled from her hands and thudded against the tiled floor. She knelt to pick them up, her reflection flickering in the steel of the sink, her own frightened eyes staring back. She had just heard something that could destroy the Al-Mahdi family, or maybe save her own life. The next morning dawned gray and quiet, the kind of Houston day when the sky felt heavy enough to fall. Zara Khan stood at the sink again, scrubbing the same coffee cups she'd already washed twice. Her mind replayed every word from yesterday, missing funds. "If she does, she won't for long." The voices echoed like thunder in her head. She hadn't slept. Each creak of the old house made her flinch. Each sound of footsteps in the hallway felt like a warning. She thought of leaving, packing her things and walking straight out of the front gate. But where would she go? Her visa renewal papers were still with the agency. Her salary wasn't enough for even a week's rent in the city. The mansion was both her prison and her refuge. At 8 a.m., the daily rhythm began. Yusuf running down the staircase, shoes untied, yelling for his backpack. Iman scrolling her phone at the breakfast table, ignoring her mother's soft reprimand. Mrs. Layla descended last, wearing a silk robe and distant eyes. Her beauty was immaculate, but Zara often wondered if her sadness lived behind that perfection, like a shadow no one else could see. "Zara, the table's uneven again," Layla murmured without looking. "Yes, ma'am," Zara replied, adjusting a plate that wasn't crooked at all. Mr. Amir joined a moment later, all confidence and calm. He smiled at his wife, kissed her on the cheek and sat at the head of the table, as if nothing in the world could touch him. But Zara noticed the tiny tremor in his hand as he poured his coffee. She noticed everything. While serving the family, she caught a glimpse of a black folder half tucked under Amir's arm. She recognized it. The same kind he had been carrying yesterday when he met the man in the study. The same folder he had locked in the drawer afterward. When the children left for school, the silence in the house deepened again. Layla stayed in her room upstairs, speaking softly on the phone. Zara didn't mean to listen, but when she passed by to deliver laundry, her hand froze on the doorknob. "No, he doesn't know," Layla whispered. "But if the auditors find the offshore account, everything will collapse. You don't understand. Amir isn't who you think he is." Zara's heart pounded. Offshore account. Missing funds? The puzzle pieces began to connect like storm clouds forming a funnel. She took a slow step back, her shoes barely touching the floor. But the loose tile near the hallway creaked, a sound that might as well have been a gunshot. The phone went silent. Layla's voice hardened. "Who's there?" Zara panicked. "Ma'am, it's just me bringing the clean sheets." The door opened halfway. Layla appeared, her expression controlled, lips curved into a polite, practiced smile. But her eyes were sharp as glass. "You must be careful where you walk, Zara," she said softly. "This house keeps too many secrets already." Zara nodded, lowering her head. "Yes, ma'am." When Layla closed the door again, Zara's knees felt weak. She walked toward the laundry room, trying to breathe. But on the way, she noticed something odd near the study door. The lock had been changed overnight. Her curiosity warred with her fear. Every instinct told her to stay away. But fear had already lost its grip on her once curiosity took hold. That afternoon, when the family went out for errands, she slipped quietly into the study. The air smelled faintly of cologne and paper. On the mahogany desk sat a small safe box, partly hidden under a stack of reports. The lock gleamed new and silver. Beside it lay a discarded envelope with the corner torn. She picked it up. Inside, a check, one she shouldn't have seen, paid to the order of South Star Holdings. Amount $2,500,000, signed by Amir Al-Mahdi. Her hands trembled. $2.5 million. Zara looked toward the window. Outside, a gardener trimmed the hedges, unaware of the storm brewing behind these glass walls. She slid the envelope back carefully. But just as she turned to leave, she heard the faint buzz of the intercom from the hallway. A man's voice crackled through. "Sir, the maid's in your office again." Zara froze. Seconds later, the door swung open. Amir stood there, one hand on the knob, his face unreadable. "What are you doing here, Zara?" His tone was calm, too calm. I was just cleaning, sir." The dust... He took a slow step forward, eyes narrowing. "You're very loyal, aren't you?" "Yes, sir." "Good, because loyalty is the only thing that keeps people alive in this house." Zara's throat went dry. He brushed past her, picked up the black folder and set it on the desk. "Go prepare tea for me," he said without looking. "Yes, sir." As she hurried out, her pulse throbbed in her ears. She could feel his eyes on her back even after she left the room. In the kitchen, her hands shook so hard that the teacup slipped, shattering on the floor. The sound echoed through the marble halls. That night, as she sat alone in her tiny basement room, Zara opened her old cracked phone and typed a message to the only friend she had in America. "Mina. If anything happens to me, remember this name, Amir Al-Mahdi." She hesitated before pressing send. Then she deleted the message, because somewhere upstairs she heard slow footsteps above her room. Someone was checking every door. That night's silence inside the Al-Mahdi mansion was heavy, broken only by the faint hum of the central air system and the ticking of the ornate wall clock. Zara lay awake on her narrow cot, eyes fixed on the low ceiling. Every small sound made her tense. The groan of old pipes, the muffled whisper of rain outside, the occasional creak from the upper floors. She was sure of what she'd heard. Mr. Amir had said her life depended on loyalty, and now every instinct told her she was being watched. Around midnight, she sat up and reached under her pillow for the small Quran her mother had given her before she left Lahore. The thin pages were worn at the edges. She whispered a quiet prayer, not just for safety, but for strength. Then she heard it again. Footsteps, slow. Above her, the footsteps paused, then turned toward the west hallway, the one that led to the servants' entrance. Zara's heart pounded. She quickly slipped on her cardigan, crept up the stairs and peeked from behind the doorframe. At the far end of the corridor, under a single dim light, a shadow moved. A tall figure in a dark robe, holding a phone that glowed faintly blue. The light fell across a face she recognized. Mrs. Layla. Zara froze. Layla was speaking softly in Arabic, her voice sharp with fear and anger. "You told me he handled it," she whispered. "But the girl knows something. She's been asking questions. If Amir finds out I've been moving money to Dubai, I'll be dead before sunrise." Zara's stomach twisted. So it wasn't just Amir. Layla was part of it too. Whatever missing funds they'd been arguing about, the couple were both tangled in something dangerous, something that reached far beyond the mansion walls. The floorboard under Zara's foot creaked, Layla's head snapped around. "Who's there?" Zara pulled back, holding her breath. She heard Layla's slippers shuffle toward the stairs. Zara darted down to the basement, moving as quietly as she could, and slipped into her room, just as a light flickered on in the hall above. Minutes later, her phone buzzed, a message from an unknown number. "Stop listening. You're here to clean, not to spy." She dropped the phone, her blood turning cold. The next day, the mansion's mood had changed. It wasn't obvious at first, but the tension had settled over everyone like invisible smoke. Layla avoided Zara's eyes. Amir's tone was colder, clipped, and every time Zara entered a room, conversation stopped mid-sentence. By noon, the rain had stopped, but the air outside was thick with humidity. Zara carried laundry to the back garden to dry, her thoughts a tangle of panic and calculation. She needed to know the truth because now silence was more dangerous than curiosity. While she pinned a bedsheet to the line, a low voice startled her. "You shouldn't stay here after dark," she turned. The gardener, Bilal, stood a few feet away, his hands stained with soil. He rarely spoke more than a few words, but now his eyes darted toward the mansion windows. "What do you mean?" she whispered. He hesitated. "Just leave when you can. People who know too much in this house don't last long." Before she could respond, he picked up his tools and walked away. Zara's hands trembled as she folded the last sheet. The wind carried the faint smell of jasmine and fear. That evening, Amir called her into the dining room. His tone was polite, even warm, too warm. "Zara," he said, "you've been working hard. Sit down for a moment." She hesitated but obeyed. He poured her a glass of juice himself, something he'd never done. "You've earned the family's trust," he continued. "But I must ask, have you spoken to anyone outside about our home?" "No, sir," she said quickly. "Never," he smiled. "Good. Loyalty is everything." Zara stared at the glass. The juice shimmered gold under the chandelier. Her hands stayed folded in her lap. Something in his voice chilled her, the same careful calm she had heard before. Amir leaned closer. "I know what people say about this family. I also know you're smart enough to keep your head down. Because those who don't..." He let the sentence drift away like smoke. Then he straightened, smoothing his cufflinks. "You may go." Zara rose, her legs weak. When she reached the kitchen, she dumped the untouched juice into the sink and watched it swirl down the drain, her pulse hammering in her throat. At dawn, she made her decision. She slipped into the study again, this time not to look, but to take. The black folder was gone, but the safe remained. She had memorized the last 4 digits from the torn check she'd seen earlier. With shaking fingers, she entered them into the keypad. A soft click. The safe opened. Inside were 2 passports, several USB drives, and a small envelope sealed with wax. She opened the envelope and gasped. It contained photos, Amir, Layla, and another man she didn't recognize, posing in front of a government office, holding documents labeled Humanitarian Fund Initiative. But behind them was a logo she'd seen on the check, South Star Holdings, and in the corner of one photo, her own face, a security camera still, time-stamped. Her breath caught. They had been watching her long before she ever overheard them. Then came the sound she feared most, a door creaking open behind her. "Looking for something, Zara?" It was Layla. She stood in the doorway, one hand holding a silver pistol. Her expression was calm, almost pitying. "You should have stayed in your place," Layla said softly. Zara's heart pounded. Her only thought now was escape, but there was nowhere to run inside a house built on secrets. Zara's breath came shallow as her back pressed against the desk. The polished mahogany edge dug into her palms. Across from her, Layla stood motionless, one manicured finger resting on the trigger guard of the gun. Her silk robe shimmered faintly in the lamplight, the folds rippling like quiet water. "Please, Ma'am," Zara whispered, trying to keep her voice steady. "I wasn't stealing. I was cleaning." Layla's mouth twitched in something that wasn't quite a smile. "Cleaning? At 5 in the morning? You really think I'm that naive?" Zara swallowed hard. "I heard things. I just wanted to understand." "Understand?" Layla's tone sharpened. "Do you have any idea who you're working for?" She took one step closer, her heels soft against the Persian carpet. "You think this is just some rich man's home? You think this is about money?" Zara's fingers brushed the edge of the open safe. Inside, the USB drives gleamed under the light, their metallic surfaces catching the faint reflection of Layla's gun. "What is this, then?" Zara asked quietly, surprising herself. "If it's not about money." Layla's eyes flickered just for a second, a crack in the mask. "It's about power," she said. "Hand power doesn't forgive curiosity." Zara's mind raced. Her only chance was to stall, to make Layla talk long enough for someone to walk by. Though deep down she knew no one would. Not at this hour. The mansion was a fortress. Then from somewhere outside, thunder rolled across the sky. A storm was coming again. "Where's Mr. Amir?" Zara asked softly. "Does he know you're doing this?" Layla's lips curved. "Amir thinks he runs this empire, but everything he built, every dollar was funneled through me. The foundations, the shell companies, the charities that don't exist." She took another step forward, lowering the gun slightly, lost in her own confession. "He wanted to play God. I just became smarter at it." Zara's gaze darted to the desk drawer. Inside was a letter opener, small, sharp, brass. Her fingers inched toward it slowly, inch by inch. "You killed the last maid, didn't you?" she said, stalling. The silence that followed was answer enough. "She found out," Layla murmured, "and she tried to sell the story. We found her before she could." Zara's pulse thundered in her ears. "Found her before she could." "Don't look at me like that," Layla added, her voice almost tender. "You'll only make this harder on yourself." At that moment, lightning flashed through the windows. For a split second, the room filled with white light, and Zara moved. She grabbed the letter opener, swung it forward. The blade nicked Layla's wrist and the gun clattered to the floor. Zara didn't wait. She ran. The hallway blurred past her as she dashed toward the servants' stairs. Behind her, Layla screamed, a sound like glass shattering. Zara stumbled once, caught herself, and kept running until she burst into the kitchen. Rain pounded against the glass doors leading to the garden. She shoved one open and stepped barefoot into the storm. The cold rain hit her face, sharp and alive. From the house, footsteps thundered. Two silhouettes appeared in the doorway, Layla and a man, Amir. He was awake now, his robe open, fury etched across his face. "Zara!" he shouted, voice echoing against the thunder. "Stop!" But she didn't. She sprinted across the garden, slipping on the wet grass, heading for the iron gate. The lock, heavy, rusted, wouldn't budge. She clawed at it, fingers raw. Amir's hand closed on her shoulder. She screamed, twisting, but he slammed her back against the gate. The rain fell harder, drenching them both. "You think you can expose us?" Amir hissed. "You think anyone will believe a maid with no papers, no family, no country?" Zara's breath trembled. "I believe in Allah," she whispered. "And he sees everything." Amir's jaw tightened. For a moment, just one, she saw hesitation, fear even. But Layla appeared behind him, clutching the pistol again, her face white with rage. "She's seen too much," Layla said. Zara's mind screamed for a miracle. Then, from the driveway, headlights flared through the rain. A voice shouted over the storm, "Police, drop your weapon!" Amir turned, stunned. Layla froze. Two black SUVs had pulled up outside the gates. Agents in raincoats fanned out, weapons drawn. The front officer shouted again, "FBI!" "Step away from her." Zara blinked, disoriented. "How?" Then she remembered the unsent message, the one she'd typed and deleted. The phone's draft folder must have auto-saved it. Mina had received it after all. Layla's hand shook. The gun tilted downward. Amir raised both hands slowly. Zara fell to her knees as the gate was forced open. The agents swarmed in, shouting commands, their voices distant through the roar of rain. A firm hand lifted her up. "You're safe now, miss," one agent said gently. Behind her, Layla's scream tore through the night as she was handcuffed. Amir said nothing, just stared at Zara, his expression unreadable. Hours later, dawn crept over Houston again. The mansion stood quiet, its lights dim, its secrets bleeding into the pale morning sky. Zara sat inside a police car, wrapped in a blanket, watching as evidence boxes were carried out. Black folders, passports, flash drives, and cash. A detective approached her window. "You did the right thing," he said softly. "You might have just exposed one of the biggest charity fraud rings in the state." Zara nodded, her voice a whisper. "I just wanted to live." He gave her a kind smile. "Now you can." As the car pulled away from the mansion, Zara looked one last time through the fogged glass. The place that had almost buried her now stood in ruin. Behind the kitchen door she had once been invisible. Now she had finally been seen. The grey morning after the raid felt like the end of a storm that had lasted years. The Al Mahdi mansion stood silent behind yellow police tape, its windows dark and lifeless. Rainwater pooled in the garden where Zara had slipped the night before. The scent of wet earth mixed with the faint tang of gun oil and paperwork, the smell of aftermath. Zara sat on a folding chair outside, wrapped in a wool blanket someone from the bureau had given her. Every muscle ached. The detective, a weary man named Agent Rhodes, was scribbling notes beside her. "You said you worked there for 4 months," he said without looking up. "During that time, did you ever see money transfers, large deliveries, or people you didn't recognize?" Zara hesitated. "Yes, sometimes at night. Mr. Amir met people by the back gate. They brought suitcases. He said they were donation receipts." Rhodes nodded slowly. "They were moving stolen grant funds overseas. You stumbled into a $30 million laundering scheme." Zara's hands tightened around the blanket. "They said I would disappear if I talked." He looked at her then, his expression softening. "You didn't disappear. You stopped them. That's what matters now." But Zara didn't feel like a hero. She felt hollow, as if the fear had carved a permanent place inside her. The mansion, once alive with chatter, now looked like an empty stage where all the actors had fled. A young officer approached. "Sir, we found another safe in the wine cellar, full of passports and," he glanced at Zara, "photos. A lot of them. Of maids, drivers, even the gardener." Rhodes sighed. "They kept records of everyone they used." Zara turned away. The thought made her stomach twist. Bilal, the quiet gardener, had warned her. People who know too much don't last long. She wondered if he'd survived long enough to see the dawn. 3 weeks later, she sat in a small government office downtown, staring at a stack of immigration papers. The fluorescent lights buzzed above her. Mina, her friend from the agency, sat across the table smiling for the first time in months. "They're giving you a special visa," Mina said. "Witness protection status. You'll have a new name, a new job, and no more fear." Zara blinked back tears. "I don't even know who I am anymore." Mina reached across the desk, squeezing her hand. "You're someone who survived," Zara nodded. It was a word she could live with. Outside, the city hummed with ordinary life. People rushing to work, buses sighing at red lights, vendors calling out for breakfast orders. For the first time, she realized she was part of that world again. Not a shadow behind a kitchen door, still at night. When she lay in the small apartment the bureau had arranged for her, the memories came back. The hiss of rain on marble, Layla's calm voice, Amir's cold eyes. She wondered if they still hated her, or if prison walls had already swallowed their pride. Sometimes she dreamed she was still in that mansion, polishing silverware, while voices whispered secrets in the next room. But in those dreams she wasn't afraid anymore. She turned around, faced them, and the voices fell silent. 6 months passed. The news cycle moved on. The Al Mahdi charity fraud became a headline people barely remembered. But the investigation rippled through the world of high-profile donors and politicians. More names surfaced. More arrests followed. One evening, as the sun sank over the skyline, Zara walked home from her new job at a bakery. Her apron smelled of flour and sugar, and her fingers were sticky with frosting. It was honest work, humble but hers. She passed a television shop window just as the news anchor's voice caught her attention. In a surprising turn, prosecutors have reached a plea deal with Layla Al Mahdi, former chairwoman of the Global Hope Foundation. Sources say her testimony has implicated several government officials in the laundering scheme. Zara stopped walking. The screen showed Layla, thinner now, in an orange jumpsuit, eyes hollow but alive. For a moment, they seemed to look right through the glass at her. Then the footage cut away. Zara exhaled slowly, realizing her hands had been trembling. She wiped them on her apron, looked up at the fading sky and whispered, "Maybe that's enough justice." That night, back in her apartment, she lit a small candle by the window and opened her mother's old Quran. Her fingers brushed the worn inscription inside the cover. "Allah sees what the world hides," she smiled faintly, because behind those kitchen doors, behind the wealth, the marble and the lies, the truth had finally found its voice, and that voice now lived in her. The spring air of Houston carried a different weight now, softer, slower, more forgiving. The city that once terrified Zara with its size and noise had started to feel like home, or at least something close to it. She rented a modest room above the bakery where she worked, overlooking a quiet street lined with oak trees. Every morning she rose before dawn, tied her apron and baked bread until sunlight spilled through the front windows. She no longer jumped at sudden noises, no longer checked over her shoulder every few minutes. Yet a part of her, deep, quiet, instinctive, remained alert, as if the shadows of the Al Mahdi mansion still followed her in silence. Sometimes, while kneading dough, she caught herself humming the tune of an old Urdu lullaby her mother used to sing. The rhythm of it helped her breathe through the past. Other times, the sound of the oven door shutting would take her back to the heavy slam of Amir's study door, or the echo of Layla's voice saying, "Power doesn't forgive curiosity," but life had become simpler now. And simplicity, after everything, was a kind of miracle. It was late afternoon when Mina visited her for the first time since the trial. She looked exhausted but happy. "You made the news again," she said, placing a newspaper on the counter. Zara frowned. "I thought that story was finished." Mina smiled. "Not for the people you helped. The papers are calling you the Maid who unmasked the millionaires. The government is seizing all the fraudulent assets. The charities that really needed that money, they're finally getting it." Zara glanced at the headline but didn't smile. Her eyes lingered on the photo of the mansion. Boarded windows, vines creeping up the walls, a ghost of its former glory. "That house was a cage," she murmured. "But it taught me what cages sound like." Mina tilted her head. "And what's that?" Zara looked up, her voice soft but sure. Silence. When something feels too quiet, that's when you know the truth is hiding somewhere. They sat for a while, sipping tea. The smell of baked bread drifted around them. A customer entered. Zara excused herself to serve them. When she returned, Mina was watching her with quiet admiration. "You know," Mina said, "they offered witness relocation. You could have left, started a new life anywhere. Why stay here?" Zara wiped the counter slowly. "Because this time I chose my own name, my own home. I'm not running anymore," Mina nodded. "Then you're free." A week later, the bakery's landlord brought in a local journalist, young, polite, notebook in hand. He wanted to interview her for a small community column. "Miss Khan," he began nervously, "many people see you as a symbol of courage. But how do you see yourself?" Zara smiled faintly. "Not a symbol. Just someone who was afraid and decided to act anyway." The reporter looked down, then asked softly, "If you could speak to Mr. or Mrs. Al Mahdi now, what would you say?" Zara paused. The bakery clock ticked. The smell of cinnamon filled the air. "I would tell them," she said slowly, "that greed makes people forget what they already have, and that servants see more than masters think." He wrote the line down, nodding. As he left, Zara stood by the window, watching the street outside. Children chased one another between the trees. Across the road, an elderly woman sold flowers from a cart. Zara bought a single white rose and placed it in a jar by the register. It reminded her of her mother, of Lahore, of the innocence she once had before America taught her to listen through walls. That night, rain came again, soft and steady. Zara closed the bakery early, turned off the lights and sat by the window with a cup of tea. The candle she lit flickered gently beside her Quran. Her phone buzzed once, a message from an unknown number. For a second, her heart jumped, old instincts flaring to life. Then she opened it. It was from Bilal. The message was simple. "We are safe now. Thank you for surviving," she smiled, tears welling in her eyes. The gardener had made it. Outside, the rain whispered against the glass like a language she finally understood. Months rolled by. Summer came. The bakery thrived. Zara became known not just for her bread, but for her quiet kindness. She hired another immigrant woman, a widow with 2 children, and paid her fairly. Every Friday she donated food to the shelter down the block, never for praise, only because she knew what hunger felt like. One morning, as she arranged loaves on the shelf, a man in a grey suit entered. His face was unfamiliar, but his presence carried the calm assurance of authority. "Miss Zara Khan?" he asked. She nodded cautiously. He handed her a letter sealed with the emblem of the Department of Justice. "This is for you." She opened it after he left. Inside was a check, a government reward for her testimony and cooperation. Enough money to start over completely. Enough to move anywhere, buy anything. But Zara folded the letter neatly and set it aside. She didn't need new walls or a new name. She already had freedom, and that was wealth no one could launder. That evening she walked to the park as the sun dipped low, the sky painted in hues of amber and rose. Families picnicked, children laughed, couples strolled hand in hand. Zara sat on a bench beneath an oak tree and closed her eyes. She thought of all the doors she had stood behind, the kitchen doors, the office doors, the ones that led to power and deception, and how each one had taught her to see the truth beyond appearances. She thought of the frightened girl who once scrubbed floors for silence and approval, and of the woman she had become, the one who no longer feared being seen, and she whispered a small prayer of gratitude, Alhamdulillah. The wind carried the words softly through the branches, as if the city itself had paused to listen. Later that night, she locked up the bakery, turned off the lights and stepped outside. The moon hung low, full and silver. The street was empty, except for the faint echo of her footsteps. She turned back once to look at the glowing sign above her shop window. Zara's Bread and Bloom. A home built on truth, a life rebuilt from silence, and behind every door that once hid fear, she had left light.